The book that I have chosen for this book talk is called All American Boys by Jason Reynolds and Brendan Keeley. In the book talk, we will discuss the important themes in the book and go over different activities and big ideas that I could use in my own classroom someday. To begin, I want to talk about the main characters in the book. So first, the main character, well, there are two main characters in the book, and every chapter switches between their perspectives. So the story is told in first person, but the first chapter starts from Rashad's perspective, the second chapter is from Quinn's perspective, and then it alternates each time. And each time it alternates, it's a new day. So the first day is Friday, and it shows Rashad's perspective, and then it shows Quinn's perspective, and then it moves to Saturday and shows each of their perspectives. And it shows it each day for an entire week. So the book lasts from Friday to Friday. So a lot happens in 1 week in this book. So first, Rashad Butler, he is the one who, in the story, is attacked by the police officer because the policeman thought that he was stealing when he was not. And so it's interesting to hear his perspective in the story because he offers insight into the mind of what it means to be wrongfully either attacked or accused. In this case, it's very violent, but in other cases, it's just with words or actions that are less violent. So it just shows that interesting perspective to the reader because you want to have justice for him, but at the same time are conflicted as you hear the rest of the story. So then Quinn, the other perspective that the story is told from, is not a direct friend of Rashad, but they both go to the same high school, and he is a friend of Guzzo, who I will talk about in a minute. And when he comes to the scene, he sees Paul, the police officer, attacking Rashad, but Quinn only knows Paul as Guzzo's older brother, who is his close friend, and so he thinks immediately that this kid that he's hurting did something dreadfully wrong. But as the story goes on, he soon learns that this was Rashad, one of his classmates, who was wrongfully accused, and he's torn between supporting his friend's brother, Paul, or supporting Rashad, and he has to fight the feelings of racial injustice. So the next character, Paul Galuzzo, is the police officer who hurts Rashad, and he's Guzzo's older brother, which is significant with Quinn's battle of deciding what side he should be on. And in the story, Paul seems to be racially unjust in his actions towards Rashad, but also how Quinn recounts another time when he saw Paul beating up a different black boy, and how that is significant in the story because it helps Quinn to see outside of just his relationship with Paul. The fourth character is Spoonie Butler, who is Rashad's brother, and he is an important character to Rashad because, well, he works for the UPS, which in Rashad and Spoonie's father's mind is not good because his father wants him to be more than just wearing a brown outfit. He thinks that being in the army is the ultimate goal of black men because that's the only way that they can succeed. And so Spoonie shows Rashad what it means to live for yourself and not for the approval of other people, which is important to Rashad as he develops his character and who he is. And then the fifth character, Jill, is a cousin to Paul and Guzzo. Quinn has a crush on her, which is significant because ultimately she is the one, or one of the characters who finally convinces him to join in the protest at the end of the book, and she really helps Quinn to figure out his feelings toward the whole situation. The final character I wanted to highlight is Guzzo, who is Quinn's friend and Paul's younger brother, and he's the one who is friends with Quinn and is there when the attack between Rashad and Paul happens at the beginning, and he is torn also because he doesn't want to go against his brother Paul, but is trying to help Quinn process everything that's going on. So these are just the main characters that I thought would be the most significant to understanding the themes and big ideas of the story. So there are multiple settings in the book, All American Boys. A lot of it takes place either at Springfield Central High School, Jerry's convenience store, which is where the fight between Paul and Rashad happens, Quinn's home, which is some of the time when Quinn is the one narrating the story, and then just the general neighborhood of Springfield as they all process what's going on around them. So the plot, a general overview of the plot is that Rashad is a high school student at Springfield Central High School, and he is wrongly accused for stealing chips at Jerry's. And basically, what happens is he's in the store wanting to buy barbecue chips, and he bends over to pick up something from his bag because he needed his phone and he had left it in there. And a lady at the store was buying beer and didn't see him and tripped over him and fell, and her bottle of beer crashed on the ground. And so she apologized right away, but the manager and the policeman in the store ran right over and wrongly automatically assumed that Rashad was trying to steal the chips because his bag was open. And then the lady tried to protest, but the policeman wouldn't, or the manager wouldn't let her. And right away, he dragged Rashad. The name of the police officer is Paul. Paul dragged Rashad right out into the street and started punching him on the sidewalk and pinned him down to the ground. And so Rashad then was sent to the hospital where he had some internal bleeding and a broken nose, and he spent a lot of time recovering in the hospital for that week. And during that week, Quinn, who the story is also told from his perspective, he had witnessed the scene, but didn't know what to do about it. And so, as he was processing the information, there happened to be a video of the attack, and the video went viral. And so, in the town, friends started taking sides, and then the whole town and eventually the whole country was taking sides. Some people were taking the side of Paul because he was a white cop, and some people saw it as discriminating against him. And then other people took Rashad's side, who was a black student, and many people saw it as too violent of an attack for him being wrongly accused. So then they take the whole matter, or the whole matter causes a lot of controversy within the town. And so the book finally concludes with Rashad being released from the hospital and seeing all of the influence that his story and circumstance has had on the town around him. And his friends have organized a protest for all of the young men and women who are black students in the school or in the area who were wrongly accused or shot and killed by officers just because they seem to be racist against them. And so the book ends by the last chapter being told from both Rashad and Quinn's perspective, which is interesting and unique from the rest of the book because it shows little snippets each of what they're thinking, and the whole time they're locking eyes. They don't really know each other that well, but the story ends with them finally recognizing that despite their racial differences and despite the conflict going on, they could still unite in the fact that what was going on was wrong and that it was unjust towards the people involved. So the intended audience for the book All American Boys is young adult because it's a young adult novel. It's a fiction novel, but it's based on real issues that arise in American culture and around the world. So I would say that the book is a reading level between 7th to 10th grade, but the themes within the book transcend the reading level. So it could be easily used in an 11th and 12th grade classroom that is talking about racism in the American culture. The big ideas in All American Boys, there are 4 of them. So the first one is racism. Second one is prejudice assumptions. Third one is cultural injustice. And the fourth one is diversity. So to talk about racism in this book, it can be clearly seen through the whole situation, just in the relationship between the Black students who support Rashad, and then the white students or relatives of Paul the cop. And so the argument and fight for who is right within the story relates a lot back to the whole idea of racism. For prejudice and assumptions, they kind of go together because Paul the cop has assumptions because he sees this black kid in the store and he sees an open bag, he automatically assumes that he's stealing. And so just the whole mindset that he has as a cop, at least from what we get in the story, his whole mindset seems to be one of assumptions and having prejudice. And then also other people in the culture as the town starts to take sides and argue about the situation. There are a lot of assumptions that each party has against the other, and then just the general prejudice between the blacks and whites in the town. The third one, cultural injustice. We can see the cultural injustice through the situation between Paul and Rashad as he arrests him with not much evidence, just he assumes, and then he automatically physically hurts him. So that's an example of cultural injustice. And then also the idea of diversity, how it's important. In the book, it raises the idea of the importance of having diversity in schools and in cultures, and how we should not run away from it, but we should approach it head on because all people should be equal. And so the book addresses this idea of diversity, but equality within the diversity. Which is a hard thing to maintain within a culture, but it is so important for students to think about as they read this book and just process what their own opinions are from the story. There are a couple essential questions here. One, how does the violent act of aggression towards racism affect more people than just the individual? And I thought this would be a good question starter when talking about the Paul's attack on Rashad, because it shows an act of aggression and violence because of his opinions about racism, because he saw black student as inferior to him because he was a white cop. And so just this whole idea of racism being acted upon aggressively. So the second question, how can a culture encourage diversity without promoting feelings of superiority, inferiority? Kind of relates back to the first question, but how can a culture approach the idea of diversity and equality without having one race feel more superior or inferior to the other? And this is just would open up a lot of discussion within the classroom, because maybe students have seen things that really help, maybe students have seen things that do not help. And so just having that conversation begin in your classroom can really promote good discussions between students in and outside of the classroom. The last question or idea, what is the appropriate response to discrimination and how is this determined? So the book kind of raises the question of, when someone is discriminated against, what should you do about it? And so Rashad's classmates and friends and family have this whole question of, well, what should we do now that we see our friend being physically abused because of his race? And so what they end up doing is a protest against it. But is this the right? It raises the question of, is this the right way to respond? Is this the only way to respond? So how do you determine the appropriate response to something like that? So a few important examples of intertextuality with the book All American Boys. The first one that I thought of was To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which discusses the whole idea of racism and prejudice in a culture. And so similarly, the man who was wrongly accused goes on trial, and they have to determine whether he's guilty or not. And so for Rashad, they had to determine whether, or they were trying to determine whether Paul was in the wrong or Rashad was in the wrong. And so because of the racial tension, it created a lot of issues within their culture. So I just thought that it raised a lot of the same themes. Also, the book The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas also raises similar themes because the book is about someone, or this girl, who knows her friend that was shot by a police officer, and they're trying to figure out whether it was the right thing to appropriate in the situation or if it was inappropriate based on their race. So just both of these books raise the same ideas of how to deal with people who are different than you and deal with it in an appropriate way and not be racist, but to approach it with an open mind and with ultimately love and care for the people around you. These are 3 activities that I came up with that I thought would be useful and helpful in your classroom as you go through this book study. So the first one is a debate with like in the book, the people are split between Paul's side and Rashad's side. So having the class split into teams and conducting a formal debate about the whole situation and just raising the questions, was Paul right in the way he treated Rashad? Was Rashad right in joining in the protest? And just the whole ideas in the book of which side is in the right. And then a second idea was to make posters for the protest. So having students create posters on Canva as groups that fight against racism. So each group would present their poster explaining why they chose what they put on it. So they could put on slogans that they found in the book, or make up their own slogans, or they could put names on there, like they had names in the book with students who were wrongly accused. So just helping them develop that idea of freedom of speech, but also with respect, because I wouldn't want them to create these posters that are disrespectful, but that raise a concern while still promoting justice. And then the final idea was poetry songwriting. So sometimes the best way to process something is to write about it or sing about it. So I would ask students to pick one of the themes or big ideas that we discuss in class and write a poem about what it means to them. Or if they want to turn it into music, they can do that as well. And then either their song or their poem, they would present it in front of the class, and it would just help them as a final project to be working through and thinking about the themes that we talk about in class. And it would hopefully encourage them to keep thinking about it beyond just this unit and beyond the classroom and into their own lives, and how they can apply these ideas of injustice and racism and prejudice, and how they can change their own perspective, or how they can help others who are the result or are feeling the results of this discrimination.